Okay, I think I got this in just under 5 minutes. Wow. All right, so let's see. If you guys are here, make sure that you let me know so that I'm not. Of course, it doesn't matter. It's recorded, so I can talk to myself. Okay, so as we go here, let's see. Let's do a bit of a review. Um, the chambers. Okay, we have collecting chambers here at the top, which are the atria, and then we have the pumping chambers, the discharging chambers, which are the ventricles. These things are collecting blood. Now, the right side, this being the right side, is collecting deoxygenated blood from the body, while this other side is collecting oxygenated blood from the lungs. Okay, we talked about how these walls are thin because they only have to pump the blood from there to there, from there to there. These walls of the ventricles, which are the actual pumping, the discharging chambers, have to pump things further, right? We showed the video of the lungs as they held them up and how the heart was nestled in between them. And so this right ventricle only has to pump things into the lungs in the surrounding area. So, a foot, whatever, something like that, 2 feet maybe. Okay? Yeah. What's Yeah, yeah, you can close now. And then who's in here in the morning? Okay, that's fine. Okay. Okay, sorry. Anyway, so we are going to see what we got here. The connection is which is okay, whatever. I don't care. All right. So then we talked about how this wall has to be much thicker because it's going to pump to the rest of the body. Okay, so obviously, if you're going to reach your foot all the way from your sternum, it's going to take a little bit more pumping power, a little more pressure to push the blood all the way down there. Okay? We talked about vessels and arteries. We talked about how arteries tend to be represented in red, and veins tend to be represented in blue because of the deoxygenated and the oxygenated part. Now, we talked about this pulmonary trunk that comes off of the right ventricle is carrying blood away from the heart. And by definition, anything that carries blood away from the heart is an artery. So these two arteries here, this left and this right pulmonary artery, are carrying deoxygenated blood, so they're represented in blue. However, the veins, veins are by definition what carries blood back to the heart. These pulmonary veins right here are coming back from the lungs, and they're dumping into the left atrium. Holy cow! I think I need more coffee. So, as we see this, that is going to end up being oxygenated blood. It's going to pass through the valve here into the left ventricle, eventually out through the valve into the aorta, which is going to end up getting spread out throughout the entire body. Okay, that's a quick review. If you need more review, you can just go back and watch my last lecture. So we kind of went through that. We talked about that auricle, which is kind of like the extra zipper on your carry-on bag. If you need more space, you just unzip that and it gives some more room. We'll probably get into this later further. Okay. Ventricles, discharging chambers, right ventricle, left ventricle, thick muscular walls, pumping. Right, just kind of did that. We talked about the septum, how it divides the heart in half. So right here, all the way up through there, that is septum. Okay. The superior and inferior vena cava. We talked about how the superior vena cava is basically from the armpits up, or the nipples up. That's what it's going to drain. So the head, the shoulders, the arms. Okay. And then the inferior vena cava is from the armpits or the nipples down. Not exactly, but that's the best way to remember it. Okay, so we got that. Let me go on here. What do we got? We want to do the pulmonary trunk. This is the blood vessel right out of the right ventricle that goes to the pulmonary arteries. The pulmonary arteries go to the lungs, the pulmonary veins back to the left side, and the aorta. Okay, so let's review that real quick. So, the pulmonary trunk, so right ventricle, okay, which is pumping to the lungs, goes to the pulmonary trunk to the left and the right pulmonary arteries. The lungs are out in here, right? The whole, while the heart is all surrounded by them, right? It goes to there. The lungs oxygenate it, and the oxygenated blood comes back on the pulmonary veins, which are coming in here and here, but they dump into the left atrium. Okay? And then it goes down into the left ventricle, which is pumped out of the aorta, the largest artery in the body. Okay? Okay, so let me see. Four chambers, pulmonary trunk. All right. Do I have any other? Okay. So then we have valves. Okay, we have all kinds of valves that are going on here. We've got valves to allow for one direction of blood flow. Okay, because if you have different parts of the heart that are squeezing, you don't want blood to get squeezed back. If you're in a ventricle, I better use the diagram here. If you're in a ventricle and the squeezes, you don't want it to go back up here. And so these valves, all of these valves that are involved, only allow for one direction of movement. So when that squeezes, that valve shuts and it is forced out that way. And then when that pressure stops, this valve will keep this blood from falling back into this chamber. Same way with this valve that you can see just kind of tucked up in there. Same way with that one with the aorta. So once that thing pumps and shoots all that blood out there, once that pressure goes down and this relaxes and opens back up so the blood can come down in there, that squeezes and that doesn't squeeze, it just closes and doesn't allow the blood to come back down into here. Because now that becomes an issue. If these things don't work, then the heart is having to pump blood twice. That's not good. You don't want it's very inefficient. So, pulmonary trunk, pulmonary aorta. Okay, so only one direction. So there's four valves. Okay, there's the atrioventricular valves, right? So the atria and the ventricles. There's a valve between the atria and the ventricles. The atria and the ventricles. Okay, between the I guess it's right there. Sorry. Anyway, so then we have the bicuspid valve, which is on the left side of the heart, and we have the tricuspid valve, which is on the right side. All right, so the bicuspid or the mitral valve is on the left side. The tricuspid is on the right. So this is the left side. So this would be the mitral. This would be the tricuspid. Okay? So the mitral valve is between the left atria and the left ventricle. The right is between the right atria, or the tricuspid is between the right atria and the right ventricle. Holy cow, I am struggling. Let me see something. I want to make sure that you guys are, somebody is here, baby. Who knows? There's somebody here. There's a few viewers here. Okay. Okay, so chambers of the heart, the valves. Okay, so we have the mitral on the left and the tricuspid on the right. Okay, we have these papillary muscles attached to the chordae tendineae to help prevent valves from allowing backflow. So if we look at this, we have our papillary muscles and we have our chordae tendidae right here, these strings, right? They are attached to the valve, okay? So if the ventricle contracts and squeezes blood, that valve is going to close. See these little valves right here, there, and there? That is going to close, and the pressure can get so strong that it could blow the valve back that way. So it would like blow blood back into there. But that's what this stuff is for. That's what the chordae tendidae, they're like parachute strings. They're going to hold on to that, and they're not going to allow this valve to be shot back up in there so blood will shoot back up into the atrium. Okay? We don't want that. So these chordae tendidae help, and these papillary muscles, the muscles contract, pulls on the chordae tendidae so that the valve will not blow back and allow blood to shoot back up into the atria. That would be extremely inefficient. Okay? Let me see here. So, heart valves. So we did these, okay? And then we talk about the semilunar valve. So that's between the ventricles and the arteries, right? So we're either talking about the pulmonary one or the aortic, right? So we have the aortic semilunar valve, which is on the left side, right? Because that's going to come out of the left ventricle. Or we're going to have this pulmonary semilunar valve, which comes out of the right side. So let's take a look at those real quick. So we have this is the right side of the heart. So this is going to the lungs. And so that is the pulmonary semilunar valve. Okay, the left side of the heart, the left ventricle goes into the aorta. So right there, you can see just tucked up in there, back behind there, just the two ends of it. That is the left, or the aortic semilunar valve. See that? Again, these are one way. They do not allow blood to come back into the ventricle. Completely inefficient. We do not want that. Okay? Are those the same tendons that could snap if you experience extreme trauma? If they could snap? Are those the same tendons that could snap if you experience extreme trauma? Most of the time I would say that these things aren't going to snap with trauma. If you would have that much trauma to the heart, then you would, I don't think the tissue around here would be able to sustain such trauma. Now, we're going to get into the end here when we talk about mitral valve prolapse or something like that, and we're going to talk about some of this stuff is damaged and does not, and it will not hold the valve, and so then the valve becomes no good, and so it will allow for blowback, and then that causes your heart to work harder, and we don't want that. Okay. Heartbreak. No. No. I see, that's the thing about this. I can't tell if you're being serious or not, and here we go. So now you're making whatever. Anyway. Okay. Die from heartbreak. Okay. So, semilunar valves, okay? Pulmonary and aortic, we went through those, okay? Remember, these are one direction, only one direction, okay? When these valves go bad, when you have to have a valve replacement, usually what ends up happening is that factor right there is interrupted because the valve's not working, and so now the blood flows back and forth through, causing the heart to be extremely inefficient, which means the heart's going to have to work harder, which means it's a muscle, it's going to get bigger, and when it's bigger, it's going to require more blood, and that's a problem. Anyway, okay. The valves open and close to prevent backflow of blood, which is important in keeping oxygenated and deoxygenated blood from mixing and gets them. Okay, whatever. Okay, we'll go through some conditions that keep the heart from working well and being whatever. Google. Oh, brother. Hey, if you guys want to just Google all these slides, you're more than welcome. So, operation of the valves, okay? So when we see blood coming back into the right atrium, now if I was doing this diagram, I would have used a blue arrow here. Why would I have used a blue arrow? And I would have used a red arrow over on the other side. So over on this right side of the heart, when we're talking about the right atrium, we're talking about the right ventricle, I would use a blue arrow as, so that would be deoxygenated blood coming back into the right atrium. Okay? As the blood returning to the heart fills the atria, putting pressure against the atrioventricular valve, and the atrioventricular valves are forced open, right? So once this gets so full, that valve is forced open, and with a small contraction, we have a ventricle that is filling with deoxygenated blood. The ventricles fill, the atrioventricular valve flaps hang limply into the ventricles, right? So it's open and it's allowing the blood to fill. The atria will contract, forcing the additional blood into the ventricle, right? So it's going to once those valves are pushed open, it's going to leak down in there. That atria is going to contract and fill that sucker up with blood. Okay. The second part of this here is now the ventricles will contract now. Okay. Now you're going to see the ventricle contract. That's going to increase the pressure in this side. Okay. That pressure is going to cause that AV valve, that tricuspid, that atrioventricular valve to close. The pressure is going to build, and it's going to build enough to cause the aortic or the pulmonary semilunar valve to open. It's like a pressure thing. All right, so we have the filling of the atria, right? The filling of the atria, it starts to get full, it spills into the ventricle. This thing contracts a little bit to finish it off and push the rest of the blood up in there, okay? This thing here is going to, what we got here? This thing here we have is going to contract. That's going to force the AV closed. This chorda tendineae and the papillary muscles, they're going to keep that valve from flapping back open that way and allowing blood to go back up into the atrium. That pressure is going to build so much enough so that this thing will open and allow blood to go into that pulmonary trunk. Now, this is happening simultaneously on each side. So when this is happening for the right atria and the right ventricle, it's happening for the left atria and the left ventricle. All right? So as we see this, we can see as the ventricles contract, the intraventricular pressure rises, blood is pushed up against the semilunar valves, forcing them open, right? So it's going to force them open. And this is a pretty good picture here of how you can see the blood flows. And then once that pressure goes down, those flaps come back down and don't allow blood to come back through. Okay? It's a very efficient system, very much intelligent design. So we can, this is a big slide. You need to understand this. You don't need to just, you need to understand this. Knowing the steps and memorizing them, okay, but I would rather you know it. I don't even know if that heart animation video works. I'm not worrying about that right now. Okay. So when we talk about heart sounds, now that we know, hold on, is there any questions real quick? Is there any questions? Do I need to go back over anything? Get some coffee here. I don't really even know how many people are watching. Okay, so I don't see anything yet. So as we've done the heart valves, okay, and we've done the we've done the chambers, and we've done that. So this is a big part of it. The operation, how this thing flows through, is a big part of it. And again, this is when I tell you, if you want to or if you should take a piece of paper and draw this out, and you can color code it. You can do whatever you want to do it, but whatever. Okay, so we got that. Now, since we understand that these valves and its pressure thing, and that they close and that they stop the blood flow and they slam close. Well, I say slam, but they come close, right? So the heart sounds that we hear, right? The leapt up, leapt up, leapt up, leapt up, leapt up, right? That's these valves, all right? So the first sound that we hear is the AV valves closing, right? The valve between the atria and the ventricle. That's the first sound, right? So when does that thing slam shut? When the ventricle contracts, right? The ventricle contracts and it slams. Cardiomyopathy. What are you doing? She's not even paying attention. She's googling. Anyway, DUP, and then the semilunar valve. Why is my phone going off like this? Then the semilunar valve, when the ventricle stops contracting and the blood stops being forced into the aorta or stops being forced into the semilunar trunk, it will slam shut, and that is the second sound that you're going to hear. All right? So let's look at this real quick. All right? So we have two different circuits. The right and left side act as different pumps. Okay? So looks like a lot, but you already know this. Okay? You already know this. So we have our pulmonary circuit, right? My word. We have our pulmonary circuit. You guys are all going to have PTSD and just be, oh my word. All right, I'm going to turn this on. Okay. All right, so pulmonary side. So the right side of the heart, deoxygenated blood. Okay? The systemic circuit, oxygenated blood. All right, so let's go through this and look. So it carries blood to the lungs and back to the right side of the heart. All right, so we have our superior and inferior vena cava. It goes into the right atrium. We already know that. It goes through the tricuspid valve, which we just talked about. It goes into the right ventricle, into the pulmonary, through the pulmonary semilunar valves, into the pulmonary trunk, into the pulmonary arteries, to the lungs. Okay? So let's do this. Okay. So we have superior and inferior vena cava dumps deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. It travels through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Then it goes through the pulmonary semilunar valve into the pulmonary trunk, into the pulmonary arteries, to the lungs. That's your circuit. All right, so if you can draw it out, you can make it. You get it. You understand this. If you can draw it, you know this circuit. Okay, you know that. Okay, so now the systemic circuit is the oxygenated part. Okay, it carries blood to the body and back to the left side of the heart. So with this, so now we've been to the lungs. All right, so now we switch circuits. Now we go to the pulmonary veins, which is going to bring blood back into the left atrium. It's going to travel through the mitral or the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle, through the aortic valve into the aorta, which goes to the rest of the body. Okay, so let's look at that again here, right? So we have our lungs out here, okay? It is going into the pulmonary veins, into the left atria, into the left ventricle, it goes from there to there, through the mitral or the bicuspid valve. Maria, I didn't mean that you didn't. You had to retract them. I was just anyway. And then once the pressure builds, it will shoot up through the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta and go to the rest of the body. All right. So even though this looks like a lot of stuff, we already know it. Okay? We already know it. When is quiz 1? There it is. Okay, we're getting there. All right, so coronary circulation. All right, so this is where we want to make sure we understand this, right? So do you remember how when we talked about red blood cells do not have aerobic respiration, right? Well, they don't have aerobic respiration. And so they don't use the oxygen that they carry. Okay, so in a way, the heart does not use the oxygenated blood that is inside it. Okay? It gets fed oxygenated blood through arteries, but it doesn't just absorb it or it doesn't just diffuse into the muscle. Okay? So when we look at this, blood contained in the heart does not nourish the heart. Okay? What's inside the heart is being pumped. What's inside of here is being pumped. Okay? The oxygenated blood does not feed this tissue and all this kind of whatever. No. Okay? What feeds this tissue is there. Okay? Where we have the arteries that are around the heart. Okay, so let's do this. All right. So the right and left coronary arteries and their major branches supply the heart. Okay? The cardiac veins empty into the coronary sinus, which drains into the right atrium. The left ventricle works the hardest, so needs the most blood. Okay, so if we look at this, right? So the right and left main coronary arteries feed the heart. Okay? And there's veins that will dump the blood back into the right atrium. Okay? And they're basically saying that we have a lot more going on with this left side because the demand is higher on the left, right? There's more muscle on the left side. This thing works harder. It pumps harder. There's more muscle to feed. It requires more oxygen. So the vasculature, there's more vessels to go to that left side of the heart. Doesn't mean that the right side's not important. It means that this is there's just more to it. Okay. So heart attacks come from this stuff, where we have a clot or something that is blocking a certain section. Remember we talked about how clots tend to go down the tree and go down the tree and block off a certain thing, and then anything from that branch to the end is going to have a problem, right? So that's kind of what we're saying. So you get a block here, then everything from there out to here is going to be starved of blood. You get a block here, everything here is going to be starved. You get a block here, right? You get a block here, that's bad news, right? You get a block down here, bad news. You get a block here, So anyway, any block is bad news, but you see what I'm saying. Cardiac veins, left ventricle works hard, so it needs most blood. Yeah, so let's just see. I wonder if this thing. Let me just see if this will work. Is it showing? Is the video showing? It probably is. It probably is.
My name is Mustafa Ahmed. I'm an interventional cardiologist. The width associated with a complete
we'll learn more
blockage
about that.
are known as the coronary
So here we are, we're
arteries.
talking about
And by far the most important of these are the left-sided arteries. And much starts to.
Let me see some here.
And one of the methods, a scar. So how do we diagnose what's going on in?
So if you can see this, you can see how they take dye and they shoot it into the vessel, and then they take and they light it up. Right now, if we're just going to look real quick, we can see the vertebrae. See the vertebrae here? Vertebrae, vertebrae. So this heart, that's going to be a thoracic vertebrae, right? Because if we're looking at the heart,
inside the coronary arteries. And one of the methods of doing this is what's significant gives rise to the left
so let's look at this,
which is the blood supply to the
so right coronary artery. Here's the right side, okay, which they would say would be the not as important side, okay? And we have this right coronary artery. Then we have this left coronary artery, right? We have the left circumflex, which is going to go around the backside, and the left anterior descending, which is going to go right down the middle of the heart. So let's look real quick. If we look here, left anterior descending, okay? So look at this. You're talking about the septum's right here. You're talking about, when we look at this, that left anterior descending is going to go right through here and supply all of this, okay? Now remember, there's this much muscle surrounding this whole thing. It domes back over. We've cut half of it away. So there's a lot of muscle here. So if we take that artery, they call that the widowmaker, right? If you lose this blood supply here, that's to mostly the ventricle, that's a problem. Then we have the circumflex, which kind of goes around this back side of the heart. Okay, let's go back over here.
The left side of the heart, and the left main artery gives rise to the left circumflex artery and the left anterior descending artery. We're going to call the left anterior descending artery the LAD from now on. And when the LAD has a critical blockage right at the beginning of the vessel, this is known as a widowmaker. And I'm going to show you this in more detail in the next slide.
A block in here.
The problem with a critical blockage right at the beginning of the LAD is that it then means the entire blood supply to the front will be a patient with a widowmaker blockage.
So we have a 95% blockage at the beginning of the artery, right? So if we look at this, I don't know if I can blow this thing up here. What is this? Yo, that's so much better. Let me see about this. Yeah. So we see here, when we put the radioactive dye in here, or the dye, and we can see that how this looks like it's interrupted. There's a big white thing here, right? So if we look here, a nice bunch of blood flow going in here, and then all of a sudden, look at that little bit of blood that's making it through, how it's pinched off there. It's noticeably smaller, okay? So now, with this, only about this much getting through there, this blood supply is compromised, right? And so
these are two views of the LAD in the same patient.
Let's see.
Treat these blockages inside a blockage.
So here's kind of this is kind of what they're representing, right? So they've seen whether it's cholesterol or whatever has caused this, right? Well, we have this area where it has pinched down the blood flow, okay? And so they take in one of those stents and they stick it in there and they blow it up and they push it out and they leave it in there and allows to restore blood flow. And what they're going to do is they're going to show you that.
Which is an example of
here's the blockage, right? See how narrow that went down? Nice and wide here, nice and wide there, and really narrow. Then they put in the stent, right? And they open it up, and now look at how much blood flow can go through, okay? So when Grandpa or Grandma goes in to get a stent, that's why it's such a big deal here, is because now if you all of a sudden decide you're going to work hard and you're going to climb a bunch of steps and your heart needs more blood because it starts to beat faster, but you're only allowed to get that much blood through there, when you stick a stent in there, they're going to feel way better, okay? Let me see, placing stent, So here,
the left main artery gives blood to the LAD, main artery, and the circumflex artery.
So here's another one, right? Here's the left main artery, circumflex, left anterior descending. Look at that, 95% blockage, right? Here, it's almost a complete block, all right? So what they're going to do is, again, they're going to go in and they're going to do a stent procedure, okay? They're going to go in here. Here's the blockage. Going to go in with the stent, and then they're going to open it up. Look at the difference that is able to get in there. It's crazy. Okay, so anywho, so you can go through and look at that, and that'll help give you some of that whatever. So when we talk about flow, this looks crazy too, but we've already done this, right? Everything represented by the blue is the pulmonic circuit, and everything represented by the red is the systemic circuit. Okay? So if we look at this through one more time, and then we're going to be done, because now we're going to have quiz coming up probably Monday. And we can review tomorrow with your questions. Okay, anyway. So, superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, dumps into the right atrium, okay? Travels through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. It'll go through the pulmonic semilunar valve into the pulmonary trunk, into the pulmonary arteries, go to the lungs to be oxygenated. Then we switch systems. Then we switch to systemic. From the systemic, the lungs, it'll come back in on the pulmonary veins, dump into the left atrium, through the mitral or the bicuspid, into the left ventricle, through the aortic semilunar valve, into the aorta, to the rest of the body. Okay? You have to know that. So, what we'll do is on tomorrow we'll review, and I would suggest you be here so that we can review together. I don't know how many people are actually here, 4 of you. But we'll do that, okay? And then quiz on Monday, and I'll send it to you, and then lecture Monday, and I'll just keep recording these. Okay. Does anybody have any questions before I sign off? Goodness gracious. No, huh? So we'll have a quiz on Monday. I'm going to send you the quiz, okay? Again, let me think about which slides are. You're going to want to know how it's positioned. You're going to want to know all this. I'm going to ask a question probably on. I'm going to ask quite a few questions on this kind of stuff so that you know what's going on here. The valves you're going to need to know. Okay. All right. So, again, the nice thing about this too is you can go back and listen to my lovely voice many times if you need to and be refreshed. But the big thing is you need to ask questions if you have them. All right. So get them. If you want to email me questions, go ahead. Maria, I didn't mean to get after you. Anyway, but send me questions and as they pertain to what we're talking about, and I will work on answering those before we do any other review or anybody asks any questions. All right, so I'll see you later. Have a great day.